I'm going to speak to you about 8 things worth believing for a healthy, enjoyable life. You will say 8 things? That's impossible. We can cope with 3, maybe 4, but not 8. Well, start believing in the possible. Way back as children, your mother probably said to you, "I've been bottling some fruit. I need 8 more jars from the cupboard outside. Would you go and get the 8 jars? Now, are you going to come back with only 3 jars? You remember, she said 8. So today, 8. In Psalm 138 that I read today, it said, "I have been given a task to do, and I hope to stay with it until it is finished." That's for all of us. The Sochi Winter Olympics are now on. If you've watched some of those skiers coming at high speed, hitting the ramp, and then lifting high into the air and somersaulting once or twice and twisting, then landing squarely on their feet below, you would say, that's miraculous precision. They've finished the task. So with some personal interest, I read the astonishing story about Evgeny Plushenko, the astonishing story of his discovered zest. He's a figure skating champion, competing in the Sochi Games. Only a year ago, he underwent major spinal surgery. That's why I say I have an interest in this person. I thought, what zest that this man, just 12 months later, can be doing this ice skating, figure skating, and already he has won at least 3 world championships. What zest. William James, that famous psychologist from way back, in his 1902 Gifford Lectures published in this little book, it's called The Varieties of Religious Experience. He gave 5 characteristics of the religious life, of religion. And the 4th one is all I'll speak about. The 4th one, he said, is a belief in a new zest, which adds itself like a gift to life and takes the form of enchantment in life. Zest to enchantment. There is my number 1, something worth believing for a healthy, enjoyable life. A new zest that brings with it an enchantment. Now, I know that many people say zest. What do you mean by zest? But then you see someone. Is it a young person? No, sometimes even the young person can lose their zest and they become flat. So you see an older person and he says, "Oh, I'm too old." But even the old person, you look at him again, her again, and you say, "Look at their zest." That zest, a gift of life and its enchantment, number 1. Number 2, we see the need of all of us for some nourishment. Nourishment for the body, we need it. But we need nourishment for the mind, and we need nourishment for the soul. It is impossible to get our heads into this business of world hunger, for example. That's nourishment. Do you know 146 million children in the world are suffering from conditions that are the result of acute or chronic hunger? Hunger. Is that hunger of the body, hunger of the mind, hunger of the soul? Across the world, We're hearing more and more of huge populations moving, massive battalions, if you like, of refugees moving across the oceans, leading governments into various levels of indecision and inhumanity, where the task of stopping the traffic on the high seas can become more important than the human suffering. No one believes that the boat people are out there on the high seas to have some fun. They're not out there to have a holiday. They're hungry. They are in search of food for themselves, for their children, for the future. And we who have food don't know how to cope with that. And before we become too committed to the policies and practices of sending the people back to homelessness, to more poverty and more hunger, labeling them as the trash in sinking boats, we might pause to ponder that we are, after all, a Christian nation, and at the center of our Christian faith is one person, Jesus of Nazareth, who spoke of the least of all his children. If we believe in nourishment, how will we share it? Nourishment is not only about our physical food. Nourishment is about what we believe in our minds and what is going on in our souls, both as individuals and as a community. The soul of mankind is on trial as we contemplate the hunger of hundreds of thousands, millions of people. Number two, that was the belief in nourishment. Number three, I believe in the human heart. So do you. Of course, in one sense, I'm talking about the physical heart. But I believe in four hearts. The physical heart, the emotional heart, the psychological heart, the spiritual heart. We're much more informed in 2014 about the health and well-being of our physical heart, but not so informed about our psychological heart, our emotional heart, or our spiritual heart. So let me tell you what a very distinguished heart specialist of the physical heart, a cardiologist, once wrote, not so long ago. He said, "I have found that the most powerful intervention for most of the people with whom I work, including staff and patients, is the healing power of love and intimacy and the emotional and spiritual transformation that often result from these." I'm quoting Dr. Dean Ornish, and he was commenting upon his own research and the research of his colleagues in America as they look into the major health problem of the world, cardiac disease. And he said, important as our research findings have been in the field of the physical issues of heart health, all the participants and their families in our study said that it was just as important to talk about discovering sources of peace and well-being. It was just as important to create better relationships. It was just as important to develop compassion for themselves and for each other. It was just as important to experience a connection, he said, with something larger than themselves. Because often in our heart conditions, physical heart conditions, we can become so interned and absorbed with our physical condition that we forget that we are part of a bigger context. He said, curiously, this is what he said, curiously, in the top journals on cardiology in America and around the world, very little has been written on emotional stress Or very little has been written on the psychological factors like anger, boredom, and burnout. And nothing at all has been written on the spiritual dimensions of the heart. Even though, he said, I quote him, he said, even though the heart has been the symbol of love and compassion and spirituality for thousands of years. So somehow we can conveniently push that all aside and focus only on one aspect of the heart. And here is one of his most telling remarks in his book. He says this, I've quoted it before several times. He says, anger closes our hearts. Compassion is a doorway to an open heart. Do you see why this place of St. Michael's is so important to the whole human scene? We want people to move through their anger, their uncontrolled anger, and to discover that other emotion, that more compassionate emotion. Compassion is not only for other people, he said, but here is the challenge: how to find compassion for ourselves. Thus, we need to emphasize the human heart, the physical heart, the emotional heart, the psychological heart, the spiritual heart. 4 hearts. And then read the words of John O'Donoghue when he wrote, I printed it on the order of service today. He says, now is the time to free the heart. Let all intentions and worry stop. Free the joy inside the self. Awaken to the wonder of your life. And so I come to the next. A belief worth having is my 4th F. Oh yes, many of you will not know what I'm talking about. In my psychological studies that I've been doing, I have a schema of some 25 Fs. How do you feel? Is certainly a critical F. F1. It immediately affects the way you function. F2. And F3 is your focus. Where is your focus? On yourself out there? Where is the focus? What are you so strongly focused on? The 4th F, I'm not going to go through the 25. The 4th F, your fantasy of the future. Without a fantasy of the future, you've lost the energy for your future. You're not looking forward to your future. You may even be closing down, thinking there's not much of a future ahead of you. Come on. Open up with the 4th F. If we can keep alive the positive fantasy of the future, life is more likely to be positive, isn't it? What resources do you need? What do we need to identify and develop and to give real colour to a good, positive fantasy of the future? That's the fourth one today. So we're doing all right, aren't we? Number 5. It's important to move off the spot where you've been too long. Many of us sit on the same spot. And so we miss out on the ongoing meaning to life. We get stuck with that spot and whatever meaning existed for us then back there. John Marsden, in one of his essays, told of his train ride from Calgary through to Vancouver in Canada. He said the sights, well, many of you have been there, the sights were almost beyond description. The animals, the eagles, the mountains, the prairies. Well, at lunchtime on one day, the first day, he found that he was sitting across a man who came from Wangaratta in Australia. And as they talked, John Marsden said something about Japan. And that man leant across the table and he said, yes, but those Japanese, they all look alike, don't they? John Marsden wrote, he said, I almost choked on my bread roll, but I didn't attempt to answer. It passed. The next day they were standing out on the observation platform of the train, looking out at the forests and the lakes. And that same man came up and said to him, "They don't have as many birds as we do they? We've got more birds in Australia." And John Marsden looked at him and wondered, "Have you been counting?" And on the way home, John Marsden thought more about that man and then reflected to himself. He says, "It seems that we are all born in ignorance, but it's a good idea not to stay there. If there is a meaning in life, it will not be found unless we move a certain way from where you once were. Move off the spot. The journey from ignorance to awareness is where you find the meaning to life," he wrote. "We must move off the spot we were once in, lest we just stop there, lest we don't stop growing, lest we stagnate, lest we fixate, lest we stop searching. No, come on, we're going to move off that spot." I believe that's possible. That was number 5. Meaning of life comes as we move off the spot where we once were. So I move to the next. There was a film made in 1938, I read, in which Katharine Hepburn, as Susan, was looking for her aunt's small leopard named Baby, which had escaped. Well, Susan found what she thought was her aunt's leopard, but in fact, she had found another leopard that had escaped from a neighbouring circus. Nevertheless, she got a rope around that strange leopard, and she tumbled him and tussled him, a wild leopard, all the way back to the police station. And as she went back, she was muttering to the leopard as it was slapping it backwards and forwards and tugging on the rope, tangling, and all that went on. And when she got there, she shouted out to her friend David, "David," she said, I've got him." And David said, "Oh, no, you haven't." She was unaware of the dangerous leopard that she had captured. And when she realized she'd caught the wrong leopard, she immediately was seized by fear, almost unable to cope. But David took a chair and guided the untamed leopard into a police cell, all safe. We might see in this little story that any one of us can be dragging some difficult situations along with us without being aware of our strength, our courage. And we nevertheless are able to confront and cope and even cage, even tame the unruly things of our life. Sometimes we discover that we are able to do things to bring unruly parts of ourselves, unruly parts of life under control. We're able to tame and cage the potentially destructive and dangerous elements of our life, rather than be overcome by them. St. Paul, in one of his letters, wrote, "We wrestle with many forces and fears. We do not understand or see them, but we take on that strength. We discover that strength that helps us to meet the situation that threatens us." Now we need to believe in that strength. Sometimes it comes in a sense of humour. Sometimes it comes in people caring and helping us. Sometimes we discover it in ourselves, in the most unlikely places, believing we can even believe it comes from somewhere beyond ourselves. And we don't understand it, but it's there. Susan, in that film, stumbled on her self-safety without knowing what she was dealing with. It was a self-capacity that we all need. The capacity for self-security, the capacity of self-worth, the capacity of self-love, the capacity for self-identity. It's what that psychoanalyst I read from this morning called the self-maintenance capacities. And we have them. We need to take hold of them. We need to develop them. We need to sometimes get help to mobilize them. So the next. Alice laughed loudly. She said, there's no use trying. One can't believe impossible things. This is Alice in Wonderland. And the Queen says, I dare say you haven't had much practice. When I was your age, I always did it for half an hour every day. Why, sometimes I believed in as many as 6 impossible things before breakfast. Do you know, in my work, I often see impossible things become possible. It may sound the height of the unscientific to say this, but a belief in the impossible is vital. Because remember this, our scientific discoveries, like great scientific discoveries, have demonstrated again and again that things regarded as impossible can become possible. I watched the television clip of Rod Laver, famous tennis player, showing his process of recovering from the stroke he suffered, and it threatened his life. But I saw in all his activities his determination, his tenacity, his resolve, his refusal to give in, his belief put into practice that the impossible was possible. Number 8. The other day someone handed me a scrap of paper, just a scrap of paper, and I opened it, unfolded it, and it read, I believe my life is an incredible gift. So here was I, the giver, being on the receiving end of a magnificent piece of wisdom, a great discovery, a great teaching. I believe that my life is an incredible gift. Now, I would like to tell you that person who gave me that scrap of paper has had a terrible life, really. Many losses, shocking tragedy, and a great deal of pain. Years of it. And as I fumbled with that scrap of paper in my pocket sometime afterwards, I thought how many people, in fact, have told me that in spite of all their troubles, they would say their life was an incredible gift. And so the psalmist today said, in an era long ago, an era that we can not even imagine, he said, I believe I've been given a task to do, and I hope to stay with it until it is fully finished. I've been given an incredible gift. That belief, you see, gives coherence to your life. It gives you a sense of purpose, a sense of enhancement, aiming you towards your fulfillment, which in turn points us to a healthy, enjoyable life. How different life would be for all of us if we could follow John O'Donoghue's words, now is the time to free the heart. Let all intentions and worries stop. Free the joy inside the self. Awaken to the wonder of your life. You've been very kind. 8 things, and you've listened to all of them. Did you get them? They're there. Number 1, a new zest. We can all be part of that. A new zest. That's worth believing going after. Number 2, nourishment for the body, nourishment for the mind, nourishment for your own psychological self, yourself, the heart, the soul, the human heart, the 4 hearts. The human heart, the physical heart, the emotional heart, the psychological heart, the spiritual heart. The number 4 was, don't ever forget to keep alive your fantasy of the future. Fantasy of the future. And that was number 4, wasn't it? Number 5 says, remember to move off the spot. Sometimes you've been on the same spot for too long. Meaning of life means moving off the spot. Number 6, finding the strength to control and contain the unruly elements of your life. Number 7, remember that some impossibles can become possible. And number 8, well, you could almost complete it for yourself. I believe that my life is an incredible gift for a time. Would you please stand? And the blessing. May the God you see in all the colours of creation arouse in you a sense of awe and wonder. May the God who is a sacred presence be real to you. May the God who is a source of inspiration and courage keep calling you forwards. May your God go with you and bless you today